The movie begins with Professor Joseph Hyder sitting in his Mercedes, gazing at a picture of 3 dogs arranged in such a way, with one behind the other and the third behind them. As he contemplates this image, a truck stops nearby, and the driver jumps out for a quick toilet break. Suddenly, Professor Joseph takes out a gun and shoots the truck driver. Meanwhile, we're introduced to 2 American girls, Jenny and Lindsay, who are on vacation in Germany, trying to figure out the party's location. Despite being seasoned travelers, Jenny and Lindsay find themselves in a foreign land, Germany, without a clear sense of their surroundings. They rent a car and embark on a nighttime journey to a party whose location remains a mystery to them. As they drive through the unfamiliar territory, they venture deep into a dense forest and inadvertently take a wrong turn. To make matters worse, they experience a flat tire, leaving them helpless. Desperate to get back on track, they attempt to call for car repair assistance. But in this remote forest, their mobile phones have no signal. Stuck on an empty road with no signs of civilization in sight, except for the eerie forest, the 2 friends make the tough decision to stay put in their vehicle and hope that someone will come to their rescue as they wait for a passing stranger to help them find their way. As they wait in their stranded car, a passing vehicle catches their attention, and they hope to find some much-needed help. However, an elderly man in the car notices their vulnerable situation and starts verbally harassing them, leaving the 2 girls feeling extremely frightened. In response, they lock themselves inside their vehicle. The car with the harassing man eventually departs, leaving them still in a precarious situation. Thankfully, their luck takes a turn when they stumble upon a house, which seems like a potential refuge and a place where they could finally seek assistance. It's late at night, and despite the heavy rain, they decide to brave the elements and approach the house. The glowing light from inside the house offers them a glimmer of hope. They muster the courage to knock on the door, and that's when they first encounter Professor Joseph, who steps out to see what's going on. They told him about their car trouble and asked for help to call a repair service. The professor invited them inside his house, which had a strange and creepy painting. He asked if they were tourists, and one of them said they were from New York on vacation. They repeated their request for car repair assistance, but the professor didn't seem to listen. Instead, he asked if they were related, and one of them clarified that they were friends, not relatives. The professor then went to the kitchen, pretending to make a call for help, which made the girls think he was calling the car repair service. Afterward, the professor secretly adds a drug to the water, and Lindsay unknowingly drinks it. But Jenny accidentally drops her glass and doesn't consume the drugged water. Upon noticing this, the professor reacts angrily and mistreats them. He then heads to the basement to deal with the water issue. While in the basement, he prepares an injection. Lindsay, on the other hand, starts feeling lightheaded due to the effects of the drug. However, Jenny remains conscious and urges the professor to call for help again. He refuses her request and proceeds to inject the same drug into Jenny's neck, causing her to lose consciousness. The next scene shows the professor having breakfast, while Jenny and Lindsay wake up to find themselves in the professor's lab. Afterward, the professor gives a dose of anesthesia to make another man fall unconscious. This man is from Japan and shares a bed with Jenny and Lindsay. As they all wake up, confusion and fear take over, as they have no idea what the professor has in store for them. To clear the air, the professor introduces himself as Professor Joseph, revealing that he is a retired surgeon with a rather mad and unconventional approach to his profession. One of his most bizarre endeavors involves stitching living things together. Not long ago, he performed a surgery on 3 dogs, aligning them in a chain-like formation. Now he plans to do a similar operation on Jenny, Lindsay, and the Japanese man, as their skin tissue matches. He explains the disturbing details of the operation, including the removal of their knee ligaments to ensure they can't stand. He intends to connect Jenny to the backside of Lindsay and the Japanese man in front of Jenny. Additionally, he will transplant the skin from their hips onto their jaws, creating a human chain. The aim is for food consumed by Jenny to lead to waste material traveling through Lindsay and the Japanese man, a horrifying and inhumane experiment. This process is undeniably both cost-effective and deeply disturbing, something no ordinary person would ever undertake. This doctor is clearly unhinged and revels in conducting these human experiments. It's his first time experimenting on the human body. Initially, he administers a sedative injection to the Japanese man, making him unconscious. Jenny begins to scream, and the professor attempts to give her the same injection. In the chaos, Lindsay manages to gnaw through her restraints and escapes. She has drip needles in her hand that are pulling at her skin, causing bleeding. She seeks refuge in a room, closing the door behind her, but the professor smashes the window to gain access. Lindsay then flees, running outside and ultimately falling into a pool. The professor follows and covers the pool with a lid. Suddenly, the electricity cuts off, plunging everything into darkness. Seizing the opportunity, Lindsay makes a daring escape. She heads to the professor's lab and frees her friend Jenny, who is unconscious due to the injection. Together, they make their way outside. However, the professor catches up with them, giving them both the same injection, rendering Lindsay unconscious as well. He then takes them back to the lab. Following their capture, the professor proceeds with the horrifying operation. He begins by removing the ligaments and teeth. Using a marker, he marks their bodies for the procedure. Then he goes on to peel off their hip and facial skin, embarking on a lengthy and excruciating surgery. Some days later, we see the professor again, indulging in a drink. In front of him lies his human centipede, with their wounds still far from healed. The professor tries to coerce them into standing together. They are connected in a gruesome formation, with the Japanese man leading the way, Lindsay in the middle, and Jenny at the very end, serving as the tail of this human centipede. Despite their agony, the professor forcefully arranges them for a photograph. Subsequently, the professor shows them their reflection in a mirror, which reduces them to constant tears as they witness their horrifying condition. He confines them within a cage and treats them as if they were animals. This torment continues for many days. He even compels the Japanese man to eat like a dog and further damages his jaw. As the professor continues to mistreat them, he eventually takes them outside. When the Japanese man needs to go to the toilet, he's denied, and his waste ends up in Lindsay's mouth. She is forced to swallow this repulsive substance, a disturbing process to witness and contemplate. The professor checks their medical conditions, finding that the Japanese man is physically fine. But Lindsay is experiencing constipation due to her inability to digest the waste material. Meanwhile, Jenny is deteriorating rapidly. She has not received any food or sustenance, and her wounds remain fresh, indicating that she may not survive for much longer. The professor contemplates relocating Jenny. However, just as this horrifying, painful experience unfolds, a sudden knock at the door signals the arrival of 2 police officers. They are there to search for Jenny and Lindsay, who have been missing for days. Their car is found not far from the professor's house. When questioned, the professor claims to be a busy doctor with no knowledge of the missing girls. He invites the officers to drink water, but they insist on having coffee. Suspicion arises when the officers catch the professor mixing something into the water he offers them. The officer informs the professor that someone heard the voices of the missing girls coming from his house. They also mention finding the professor's Mercedes near the truck, whose driver has been missing for several days. In response, the professor raises his voice and insists that the officers drink the water he's offered them. However, the officers refuse, even throwing the glasses aside. Sensing that he's about to be caught, the professor pretends to go get a towel, but intends to administer an injection that would make the officers unconscious. This time, however, his sinister intentions are exposed in front of the police officers. In his defense, the professor argues that they can't accuse him without reason or a warrant. The officers decide to obtain a warrant to investigate further. In the meantime, the professor returns to his lab but doesn't find his human centipede there, as they've hidden themselves. They retaliate. A Japanese guy stabbed him in the knee and forcefully tore his ear off by his teeth. The trio, weakened and altered by the operation, attempts to move upstairs, despite their physical limitations. As they climb the stairs, the stitching area of their bodies continues to bleed. The professor follows them, licking their blood from the steps, showcasing his utter depravity. In a desperate act, the Japanese man breaks a mirror, and the professor approaches. Using a piece of the shattered glass, Japanese man cut his own neck, causing his demise. Meanwhile, the police officers arrive, searching for the trio, but they find no one in sight. As they explore the professor's lab, they still don't locate them. However, one of the officers begins to feel the effects of the drug the professor had slipped into their water. The other officer eventually discovers the tortured trio, witnessing their horrifying condition. He rushes back to the professor, who is sitting beside a pool. The companion police officer is already dead. In a grim confrontation, the officer who survived saw that his friend was dead. The professor used the dead officer's gun to shoot the surviving officer, but the officer reacted swiftly and shot the professor in the head, causing the professor to die from his injuries. However, the officer was also shot and eventually passed away. Inside the house, Jenny and Lindsay held hands as Jenny passed away. Lindsay cried because she was now alone in the house with her deceased fellow captives. The movie comes to a haunting conclusion. What the fuck did I just watch to explain, you guys? Please subscribe and feel free to share your feedback in the comments.